All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are going to take a look at, well, something that's actually pretty interesting in medical education. Workplace-based assessments, WBAs.
WBAs.
Now for you, as someone who likes to really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of things, you're really going to appreciate this deep dive because we're looking at how these assessments are actually used and what students actually experience during medical training. And we've got a study here that tracked the implementation of a WBA tool, and we're going to break down the key insights.
Yes, we're going to go into this study. It's called Beyond Checking Boxes, Exploring Tensions with Use of a Workplace-Based Assessment Tool for Formative Assessment in Clerkships.
Okay.
And in this research, they followed 35 medical students. These students were at UCSF, the University of California, San Francisco.
UCSF.
Over 2 academic years, 2019 and 2020.
Got it.
And these students were all going through their core clerkships. These are the clinical rotations that all medical students have to do.
Right, where they get that hands-on experience.
Exactly.
Okay, so what we're going to be looking at is, what actually happened when UCSF brought in this new WBA tool? What did they learn?
Yeah.
What were the key takeaways about using this tool for giving feedback to students to help them learn and improve?
Formative feedback.
Yeah, formative feedback. What were some of the challenges they encountered? And how did changes to the tool itself, and even just how it was used. How did that actually change the way students saw the tool?
Yeah.
And how it changed the whole feedback process. Think of this as like a crash course, right?
Yes.
To really understanding how to use WBAs in medical training.
Exactly.
And what kind of impact they have on student learning. So let's start with, back in 2019, how did they implement this? How did it work?
Okay, so in that first year, 2019, UCSF, they had this online WBA form, and it was actually part of their evaluation system, which was called MedHub.
Okay.
So the idea was, after a supervisor observed a student, directly in a clinical setting doing something, the student would then send the supervisor a link.
Through MedHub?
Through this online portal, yeah.
Okay.
And then the supervisor would have to go find a computer, log in, and fill out this form.
So they couldn't do it on their phone?
No.
Okay, so right away we can already see some potential issues here.
Oh yeah.
So what were some of the main challenges that came up?
So right away students started getting nervous.
About?
They were nervous that these WBAs would end up being used for their final grades instead of the regular evaluation.
Right, which were supposed to be separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was this quote from one of the students, and they said, "I'm very hesitant to send out a WBA because I'm afraid that they'll just fill that out instead of my evaluation," which has happened to me before.
Ooh, so it had happened before.
Yeah, so you can imagine if you're a student and you're already thinking that this thing that's supposed to be, just for learning.
Low stakes?
Yeah, low stakes.
Yeah.
Might actually count towards your grade.
Yeah.
That changes how you feel about it.
So it undermines the trust.
Right.
It makes the students feel am I going to be judged on this? Am I going to be,
Exactly.
Okay. And on top of that, it sounds like the tool itself was a bit of a hassle to use.
Oh, it was.
Right? Like having to use a computer.
Yeah.
Did that create any problems?
Big problems.
Okay.
Because it meant that the feedback wasn't always given right away.
So it was delayed.
Yeah. And then sometimes it was super vague.
Not useful.
Not helpful at all. One student said, I've gotten feedback that's so generic, I have no idea what they're even talking about.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of times the WBA comes back weeks after I even worked with that person.
Oh, that's so frustrating.
Totally.
You can see how that would be a problem. It's the moment has passed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You've already moved on to something else.
Exactly.
So the feedback is kind of useless at that point.
Exactly.
But they did try something different, right?
Yeah, there was one good example in the anesthesia clerkship.
Okay.
They were using QR codes.
Oh, interesting.
So that let them give more immediate feedback.
So they can just scan it right there on their phone.
Yeah.
That's interesting that even that small change could make such a big difference.
Yeah, it could.
Okay, so delayed feedback, worry about grades. What else? What other challenges came up?
Well, the students also felt like they were adding to the workload of the residents and the attending physicians.
Oh, yeah.
By asking them to fill out another form.
Right. They're already super busy.
Exactly. And they said things like WBA is just annoying for everyone. Residents don't want to do more paperwork. Medical students don't want to bug their residents to do it.
Yeah, it just creates this this awkwardness.
It does.
Right? Because the student doesn't want to ask.
Yeah.
And the resident is probably thinking like, ugh, one more thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so that was another tension that came up. What else?
Okay, so this is really interesting. So they were supposed to get 2 WBAs a week.
2 a week. Okay.
But what they found was that sometimes, because of this requirement, it actually shifted the focus away from getting meaningful feedback.
Oh, interesting.
And it became more about, like, just hitting that number.
Checking the box.
Checking the box, exactly.
So, like, that weekly quota,
Yeah.
it kind of backfired a little bit, right?
It did.
Because it took the focus away from, like, the real point of it.
Yeah, and this is something you see, in all kinds of settings, not just medical education.
Yeah, for sure. Like, anytime you have, like, metrics and, quotas to meet.
Exactly.
It can distort what you're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last thing, it sounds like the usefulness of the WBAs actually varied a lot.
It did, yeah.
Depending on what clerkship you're in.
Yeah, depending on the specialty.
Okay.
So in some of them, the supervisors, like the attending physicians and the clerkship directors, they were really encouraging people to use it.
Okay.
So it was more accepted. But in others, there wasn't as much enthusiasm.
Right.
And that made a big difference in how comfortable the students felt using it.
Yeah. And how valuable they perceived it to be.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of a mixed bag in that first year.
Yeah, it really was.
A lot of challenges.
A lot of challenges.
Okay, so then what happened in year 2? Did they, make any changes based on this feedback?
They did. They did make some big changes.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so the biggest one was they switched to mobile access.
Oh.
So no more computers.
So now they could use their phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
They put QR codes on student badges.
Oh, smart.
And if you scanned it with your smartphone, it took you right to the WBA form.
Okay.
But this time it was on Qualtrics.
Oh, so not MedHub anymore.
Yeah, separate platform.
Interesting.
And they also gave students the option to fill it out themselves.
Oh, wow. Okay. Self-completion.
Yeah.
All right, so those are some pretty big changes. So did these changes actually make a difference?
They did.
Like in what ways?
For one thing, moving the WBA to its own platform.
Away from MedHub.
Separate from the grades.
Right.
That really helped with that anxiety about it counting towards their evaluation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Students would say things like, oh, after a month, I finally realized these are actually just for me.
Yeah.
They don't really matter for anyone else.
Right, just for my learning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the QR codes.
Oh, yeah, the QR codes.
Huge improvement.
Great.
Because now they could actually get feedback right away.
Yeah.
Like one of the students said, I love the QR codes. It's so much easier than trying to text or email someone a link. You can do it right there in the moment.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what about this self-completion? How did that change things?
Well, for one thing, students didn't feel like they were bugging the supervisors as much. And they felt like they had more control.
More autonomy.
Yeah, autonomy. One of them said, I think the quality of the feedback isn't as good because the supervisors can't really, think about it as much.
Right.
But it's so much easier to do it yourself.
So it's like a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
You get the convenience,
Yeah.
but you might be sacrificing a little bit of the quality of the feedback.
You might.
Okay.
But, some students were actually using this self-completion to, reflect on what they'd learned.
Okay.
And to, write down what the supervisor had said.
Oh, interesting.
So it was, their own way of documenting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but I imagine with these new changes, there were also some new challenges that came up.
Of course. There are always new challenges.
What were some of the new things that they had to deal with?
Well, for one thing, now there's this, question about how much autonomy students should have.
Right.
Versus, how much supervision they still need.
Yeah, because if the student is filling it out themselves,
Yeah.
where's the supervisor in all of this?
Exactly. And then because students were, taking more control, the WBAs started to look different.
Okay, so there was more variability.
Yeah, more variability because it wasn't always tied to a specific observation from the supervisor.
Right.
It was more about what the student decided to focus on.
Okay, got it.
And even though they made all these changes, some students still felt like the WBAs were just another box to check.
Really?
Yeah.
So that feeling didn't completely go away?
No, it didn't.
Wow.
They were still focused on hitting that number.
Getting those 2 a week.
Exactly.
Okay.
One student even said, because I wanted to get that number, as soon as they gave me feedback, I was thinking, oh my God, can I turn this into a WBA? I wasn't even really present in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's that tension between quantity and quality was still there.
It was.
Okay, so looking back on this whole experience, like, what are the big takeaways here? Like, what did we learn?
Well, the main thing is implementing these WBAs.
Yeah.
It's not just about, like, using a new form.
It's more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's a whole system.
Yeah.
It involves the tools themselves, the people who are using them,
Right.
both the students and the supervisors,
Yeah.
and then the whole context, the learning environment.
Right, the culture.
Yeah, exactly.
And it sounds like this thing, like the challenges, the things that cause problems, like they weren't always the same.
Right.
Yeah, they would
Yeah.
shift as the tool changed.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what's cool is that they use this framework in the state called CHET,
Chet,
Cultural Historical Activity Theory.
what is that?
So basically it says that we need to look at the whole feedback activity system.
Okay.
Not just the WBA tool itself. It's like a machine with a bunch of different parts.
Okay.
You've got the subjects, like the students. You've got the tools, the actual WBA form,
Right.
the technology they're using.
Yeah.
Then you've got the rules, like that 2 WBAs a week rule. You've got the community, the students, the teachers.
Right.
Who does what, the purpose of the WBA. And then the outcome, Hopefully that's learning.
Yeah.
And this theory says that problems happen, these tensions, when those different parts don't work well together.
Oh, that's interesting. So like almost like the system is trying to find balance, right?
Exactly.
It's like that first year, that computer-based tool, it caused all this tension because it didn't really allow for timely and useful feedback.
Yeah.
So that was like a big part of why they switched to the QR codes.
Exactly. It's like the system was trying to resolve its own issue.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what were some of the recommendations that came out of this? Like what did they suggest to actually make WBAs work better?
Okay. So the first one, big one, keep formative and summative assessment completely separate.
Different platforms.
Yeah, different platforms, don't mix them.
Right, because that just creates confusion and mistrust.
Exactly. One student said, I remember this one attending, he wrote this one sentence in my WBA, and then it ended up in my overall evaluation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, not good. Okay, so separate platforms. What else?
Create a culture where everyone is excited about giving feedback.
Okay.
And where the supervisors really support using WBAs.
So it can't just be like, oh, here's this new tool, use it.
No.
It needs to be more than that.
Yeah. They said things like, everyone I talked to, they were already annoyed before I even asked them to send a WBA.
Oh, wow.
So even just sending it felt uncomfortable.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So you need buy-in from everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
Make the tools student-centered.
Okay.
Give them more control. One student said, I think writing things down actually helps you remember it.
Oh, yeah.
And being more active in your feedback rather than just passively listening.
Right. It makes you more engaged.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, technology is key.
Yeah, so using those QR codes, make it easy to give feedback in real time. Like one student said, the QR code has made it easier.
Yeah, make it seamless.
Exactly.
Easy to use for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, the last one was really important.
Okay.
Build trust.
Between who?
Between the students and their preceptors, the supervisors. Because one of the students said, I think the relationship with your preceptor makes a big difference.
It's all about relationships.
It is.
Okay.
And they actually summarize all these recommendations in a table in the paper.
Okay.
Table 2.
Got it. Table 2,
Yeah.
if you want to check it out.
Okay, now I know this study was just at UCS at first,
Yeah.
so it's just one place.
Right.
Do we know if these findings apply to other schools as well?
Well, it was just one place, so we have to be a little careful.
Yeah.
And they also relied on students volunteering, so maybe not every student felt the same way.
And they did mention that, the WBAs became more accepted in that second year, but maybe that's just because students got used to them.
Okay, so it might not have been just because of the changes they made.
Right.
Got it.
And they also switched to pass-fail grading in that second year.
Oh, cool.
So maybe that changed how students thought about all the assessments.
Yeah.
But, the authors, they do say that their findings line up with a lot of the other research that's out there on WBAs.
Okay.
So it seems like the challenges they found and the things they learned probably apply to lots of other places too.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the main takeaway here for our listeners?
Well, even though a feedback form might seem simple, putting one into practice and making it work is actually super complex. It's
Yeah.
not just about the technology. It's about how people use it and what they think about it.
And the whole context.
Exactly, the environment. And understanding all of that is really important if you're involved in education or training, and not just in medicine.
This applies to like all kinds of fields.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this deep dive gave us a really close look at how one medical school did this, right?
Yeah.
And how they had to adjust things over time.
Yeah.
I think it really shows us all the different factors that can make feedback effective or not.
Yeah, it does.
So here's a final thought for you to think about.
Right.
We've been talking about this in the context of medical education, but how about in your own life? Like when you give feedback or when you receive feedback, whether it's at work or in your personal life, or maybe even in your hobbies, think about how the tools you're using, or maybe not using, and what you and the other person think about those tools, and then the whole context of the situation, how all of that affects how well that feedback is given and received.
Yeah.
It's something to think about, right?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.